What is up, you guys? Eugene here, and we are back with another analysis video. This time I'll be breaking down and critiquing power moves that you guys are working on. The person who sent me this footage was gracious enough to let me share this, and I hope if you're at any point he's at in this video or struggling with something similar, that it helps you on your journey to get these power moves as well. Just for reference, I will be speaking on topics that I cover in my previous virtual workshops. Link to that will be in the description below. So if you're interested, please check those out. With that being said, let's jump right in. All right, so it looks like there are two moves to break down, Flare and Halo. We'll just go through the Flare one first, and then I'll address that, and then we'll talk about the Halos second. All right, so that seems to be it for the flares. So the first thing I see for the flares is really pulling the hips out. So notice like you have a lot of room where you can pull your hips out forward. So remember my flare analysis workshop where I addressed pulling those hips out by having you think about your feet reaching the corners of the room, or if you imagine yourself in a box, having your feet reaching out towards the corners. So you kind of already do that here. But notice when you get to the other parts of the flare, or actually this first flare here, you'll see that both your legs are just focused on just coming straight up instead of reaching your feet pointing outwards towards the corners of the room or the box that you're in or whatever. So it looks like the front of your flare could be extended. You could pull those hips out more if you reach towards the corners. That's just something really small to clean up your flares. I don't think it's too big of a deal. But yeah, so it looks like the front V of your flares looks decent, and the back could use some work. Legs start to bend a little bit. Let's watch another. Yeah, so the back, you could use more height. Your legs bend a little bit, but I think this could be fixed by working on the sides, and that's usually going to always be my answer. Working on the sides will help with the back. So if you take a look at the L's on the side, even just this one right here, you'll see how your foot is starting pointing facing backwards, I guess towards the door or the car or whatever. So notice your foot's facing backwards. If you continue the video, your foot, as you pull your hips back, your foot's going to rotate forward, right? So as your hips are going back, your foot's now facing the front towards the camera, but look how much it dropped. So it went from here, and we'll go back a couple frames. So it went from all the way back here where your foot's facing back. And by the time you pull your hips to the back, this leg needs to remain high, but you lost all this height right here, right? So even just going through this, you're dropping so much height. By the time your foot turns forward and you're going to the back, you just dropped all that height. So you need to, I guess the goal is to hold that top leg on whichever side, whether you're coming back or going forward. Keep it up there as long as you can. And the way I would go about doing this, keeping it up as long as I can, is by focusing on rotating that hip, and it's going to allow you to stay up longer. So I'll show you what I mean. I have a video right here. So I want you to take a note on this leg right here. It's going to come up, and once it reaches that maximum point right here, I'll just play it through. Once it reaches that maximum point, notice how my foot is pointing backwards towards the mirrors. So I guess I would, my foot's pointing, I don't know how to draw depth, but my foot's pointing backwards. And I keep this leg up here, and I'm going to play it through. And as you can see, I maintain that height. So as my hips start pushing backwards, as I go to the back of the flare, my foot's now facing forward because I rotated my hips. And I kept more or less that same height of my leg, and now my foot is facing towards the camera. So that's going to be really what you're trying to aim for. And you can see the same thing going towards the front. So it's going to be the opposite. So now as I go towards the front, my foot's facing forward towards the camera. I really can't draw depth on this, but whatever. My foot's facing forwards towards the camera. And as I let it play through, my goal is to maintain the height of this leg as my hips coming forward, I have to rotate them out. So I'm going to play it through, and I maintain this leg height right here. By the time my foot is pointing back towards the mirrors, my leg is still at that same height. So whether you're going forward or back, you want to maintain this top leg right here no matter what. And the way you maintain that top leg is by rotating that hip. So I guess the way to think about it would be if like my elbow is synonymous with my hip, and let's say I'm going back. So I'm starting forward and my foot's pointing backwards towards the wall, the mirror, whatever. If my hip is going backwards like this, I need to rotate this foot, or I guess as an indicator that my hip is rotating as well. As I go to the back, my foot is going to be an indicator that my hip is rotating and keeping this same height right here. I don't know if that makes sense, me explaining it, but as I push back with my hips, going from front of the flare to the back, I need to maintain this leg height. So the way to do that, or the way to indicate that you're doing it correctly, is by seeing that foot facing backwards, maintaining that height as you push that hip back, and rotating that foot. And it should set you up for coming forward or going backwards. So going back to your video, using that hip motion, that hip rotation as you go to the back or even go forward, and using your foot direction as an indicator and of how you maintain that height, it's going to determine how long you can stay up, with the height of your hips in that flare. So you can see as you come forward, synonymous to going backwards, your foot is pointing forwards towards the camera. You have this height right here. And notice as I play it through, your height comes up. So you start low and then you come out high, which is fine. And now your foot's facing backwards, but look at the height difference between these two. You know what I mean? So it's not entirely a bad thing. It's just something you can work on. Your problem, instead of kicking back hard, instead of kicking this leg back harder, which you can always do more of. The problem is pulling this top leg on either side. So if this leg was right here, on either side, and maintaining that same height. So either for this one, it's maintaining the height, and for coming forward, it's starting that height, coming out, starting with that leg high, and then maintaining it. I think your problem is more maintaining whatever top leg, maintaining that height, and you're paying for it in the back or the front. So I think the height that you reach with your leg is already good, but you need to maintain that as long as you can. So the problem is not so much reaching that height, but maintaining it. And the way you can do that is measuring like how that foot rotates and how you're keeping that leg high or maintaining that leg height. So as you push back, like I said before, as you push back with those hips or come forward, using that foot as an indicator while keeping that leg at the same height. So this first set of flares, I also notice that your hand placement starts to go off. So you start right here, right? And then let's play it through. Your next one, second hand placement is fine. This one is fine. And then notice you're placing your hand here for the next one. It's causing you to rotate. And then you place your other hand down right here. Back here. So notice how placing your hands is causing you to rotate, and with your hand placement going off, it means you're shifting your weight, which means you could be walking forward, rotating in a circle, and it won't completely mess up your flare, but you'll be using a lot more energy if you don't intend to rotate your flare positioning. As far as like training cleanliness, try and keep your hands in the same position more or less. So 3 things I would work on is first, hips out. Think about your feet reaching towards the corners of the room or corners of an imaginary box as you go out. And you can do the same thing with the backside as well. The second thing would be emphasizing that top leg and making sure you maintain that height. And the way you can think about this is how your foot rotates as your hip goes back. And the last thing is going to be your hand placement, save you some energy right there. So yeah, that's going to be it for flares. Let's watch these through one more time. All right, now let's move on to halos. So let's watch these through actually. All right, so for halos, I see you're using the same method I talked about before in my freeze to power workshop. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically learning power by using freezes to reach checkpoints and stages of doing the power move. So you're essentially mimicking the power move using freeze transitions. So this works for some, but not all power moves. In this case, he's using it to work on halos, so the movements are a little bit more digestible. So the first good thing I see actually is that he's holding these positions. He's holding all his freezes. He's not rushing at all. So you can see he's starting in a stab, holding it, popping up, getting back, and then holding the last freeze. So that's really good. He's not rushing it. Most times, like when I was practicing it, like just the freeze ones, I would like catch it and just like, oh, okay, like I'm done and relax. But no, if you're intending to do multiple or move forward, catch that freeze and hold it. And that's something he's doing really good. He's going from stab, picking up to head, rotating, going back to stab, and then holding it. So that's really good. So you can see he's kicking up, repositioning his stab to mimic the rotation of a halo, and then catches it and pulls his leg out. So that's really good. I know people will look at this and be like, oh, well, that's not really a halo because he's going to the top of his head. He's not using like the crown of his head or whatever. And my response to that is that's fine. Get comfortable with the movements first. If you're approaching this head on with no experience, it might seem pretty daunting or confusing or maybe like overwhelming because there's so many steps in Halo or any other power move. And I think doing it like this, just doing it freeze, and transitioning isn't the only way to do it, but it's definitely a way to break the ice for people who feel a little bit uncomfortable getting started, don't really know how to kick for a Halo, how to push up or anything like that. So for those who are saying that is not a Halo, I would argue that it is. And if it isn't, then it will be. So I think this is a pretty good method of just getting familiar with the motions. So before I give any advice, I want to say first that he's hitting all his freezes effectively really well. So at this point in the process, I actually think he's ready to move on to converting this to a power move. So for those of you who are stuck on like trying to get Halo or anything like that, check out my freeze to power relation workshop where I break down all the steps for breaking down power moves by freezes. So if you have these freezes, you can pretty much start working on different power moves. And I think he's at the point where he's ready to move on to changing just these freeze stacks into a power move. So I noticed for all of these, except for the last one, you don't activate that leading leg or the straight leg to pull before you start the transition. You actually pump first with your left leg, which is fine. So if we take a look at this first one, so notice you're starting in this position right here, and then you pump with this leg right here. If you want to convert this to a power move, you should be rotating this leg first and then pumping with this leg second. But I noticed that, as you're doing this, you're pumping first with this leg right here and then pulling with this leg second, which actually, if you're trying to convert it into a power move, it should be the opposite. You want to pull with this leading leg first and then pump second. So we'll play it through. So you're still doing it. And then same thing with the next one. You start here. This straight leg, this initial straight leg needs to be pulling first. And then after you start pulling, then this leg can start pumping up to push you up to head. So it's essentially like you're mimicking like an icy ice in a way. Yeah, so basically to make it more like a power move and start converting it, I would recommend starting the freeze transition with the pull from this straight leg or your leading leg and continuing the flow of the freeze transition, and it mimics a power move a little bit more accurately. So you're here. Let me play it through. So you notice how you're already starting to push up without leading this leg. And you already pushed up with that leg. You can't see it, but it's behind. You already pushed up with that leg. But I will say in this last attempt, and we'll watch it through first, in this very last attempt, you don't do it in the first one, but in the second one, you continue to pull that leading leg all the way through, and now it's starting to look like a halo. Look. So not this first one, but the second one right here. Catch, pull, push up, and now it's starting to look like a halo. So notice for the first one, your straight leg, you didn't pull it at first. You started pumping with this back leg. You just popped up. But right where you caught this stab right here, this leg is in this position. And if we continue to play it through, you're in the stab position. Before you pop up to head, it's all the way here. So you moved this leg from here all the way to this position before you popped up. So this is a perfect example of your leading leg starting first before you pop up. So right here, not this first one, but after he does this first one, recatches that stab. Notice this straight leg right here. He pulls it all the way to that line, to the new line. He follows this arrow. And now he's ready to push up into halo. And there you go. It looks way better. It looks way more like a halo. So now you're starting to see what I mean. So before you push up, so it's just, you have both methods of like pulling and pumping, but it's just a matter of switching it up. So here, again, this leg pulls all the way. Good. And then now you're ready to pump up into head freeze, and then transition back. And then now it's starting to look more like a halo. So both of these look really great. And I would say for both of these, I would have two different approaches. One would be for quantity, and the other would be for cleaning. And this goes for both flares and halos. And it really goes for any power move if you're practicing it. So if you're trying to get like windmills, halos, flares, swipes, whatever, I would practice two different methods. One for quantity. So no matter what, every time you go to practice, no matter what, hit 10. Even if you can't hit them consecutively, if you max out your first time, you're like, oh, I hit 6 flares or whatever. And then the next time you may not hit 6 flares. Maybe you hit 3. And that puts you at 9. And then you have one more to go, and then you hit 10 flares for that practice. So for quantity's sake, do as many as you can. So like maybe like 4, and then 3, and then another 3 or something like that. And for quality's sake, from a cleaning standpoint, if you have 1, 2, or 3, I would put all your energy into those 1, 2, or 3 of that power move. And you can start pushing this number as you start to get more comfortable, as you start to get better. But let's say you have like 2 flares or something like that. Really work on pulling those legs to the corner, reaching all the way, or work on that rotation of the hips. Really focus on 1 or 2 things as you're cleaning, and then work on cleaning and quantity as 2 separate things, no matter what. And I think for your halos as well, I think from a freeze standpoint, I would try doing multiple. So like stab, head, rotate, catch. Stab, head, rotate, catch, and keep repeating that as many times as you can. And whether or not that leading leg pulls or not, that's what I would practice. So doing basically what you did for the last halo, you did pick up, catch, pick up, catch, and try and do as many of those as you can. So one, you're working on a quantity standpoint, and then when you're working on cleaning it, work on pulling that straight leg first and then pumping. So working on the order and mimicking an icy ice, trying to make it more like a power move. So there would be a quantity and then a quality standpoint. So those would be different ways I would go about it. So like I said before, both these look really great for your flares and halos. It's just a matter of cleaning and getting more each time. And like I said, those are 2 different things. With your halos, I know you're at the early stages in the process, but I think you're ready to move out of just that freeze transition stage and start activating that pulling leg and moving on, converting it to a power move. So for those of you guys who already have the freezes down and already have the transitions down, the next step would be converting it to a power move by pulling that leading leg that you have. And the link to that workshop will be in the description below, and that's going to start converting your freezes into power moves. Like I said before, I would try and do multiple of these stacks and maybe just max it out, see how many you can do regardless of your pulling leg, your pumping leg. Just see how many stab, head, rotate, stab, stab, head, rotate, stab. See how many of those you can do in a row, regardless of your leg form. And then at another practice or another time in the practice, work on just the legs and being intentional about pulling that straight leg. But really, you're not too far off with reaching either of these milestones for Flare or for Halo. And with that, there are plenty of references to my other workshops regarding the material I covered in this video. If you would like to check them out, they will be linked in the description below. I hope this helps in some capacity, no matter what stage of the process you find yourself in. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.